Today we're diving into a topic that honestly feels like it's pulled straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's happening right now. We're talking about predictive policing. It's this whole world of algorithms and big data that promises to keep us all safer, but wow, it also opens up some seriously complicated questions about technology, bias, and what justice even means anymore.
I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Can we actually use data to get out ahead of crime, to step in before something bad even happens? The potential sounds amazing, right? It paints this picture of super efficient, proactive law enforcement. But, as we're about to see, the reality is, well, it's a lot messier.
And this right here, this is the central battle we're going to unpack today. You've got the promise on one side, totally objective, data-driven decisions that are free from all that messy human prejudice. And then you have the reality on the other side. These systems can just become a digital echo chamber, taking all the biases from our past and just amplifying them.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll set up that core paradox. Then we'll peek under the hood and see what's actually going on inside the algorithm. From there, we'll get into something called the bias feedback loop, look at the real-world impact, and finally, talk about how we might be able to reimagine a fairer, more just way to do all of this.
So, let's start with that fundamental question. Can we really take data from a history that we know is filled with systemic inequality and somehow use it to build a future that's truly fair? That is the nut we have to crack.
Now, to really get why this is so tricky, we first have to understand how these tools actually function. So let's pop the hood. What is going on inside that black box?
At its heart, predictive policing is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You use these complex computer systems to chew through tons of historical data. Think arrest records, crime reports, that kind of thing, to guess where and when crime might pop up next. The whole point is to send police there before it happens.
Now, this tech generally comes in two main flavors. The first is all about place. It's called spatiotemporal prediction, and it tries to find so-called crime hotspots on a map. The second flavor is about people. That's offender-based prediction, where the system assigns a risk score to an individual based on their data, like their past criminal record.
And this brings us to what might be the single most critical concept in this whole explainer. It's called the bias feedback loop. This is exactly where that shiny promise of objectivity starts to fall apart, and we see how the prejudice of the past literally gets programmed into predictions for the future.
Okay, so you might be thinking, hold on. If the programmers are smart enough not to put sensitive stuff like race into the system, how on earth can the results be biased? And you know what? That is a totally logical question. But it misses where the real problem is hiding.
And here's the answer. The code itself, the math, it might be totally impartial, but the data that it's learning from, that's a completely different story. It's being trained on decades and decades of historical crime data, which isn't some pure objective record of crime. It's a record of where our society has chosen to look for crime.
And here's how that bias turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Step 1, the algorithm gets fed historical arrest data from areas that were already heavily policed. Step 2, because of that data, it flags those exact same areas as future hotspots. Step 3, more police get sent to those hotspots. Step 4, surprise, surprise, with more cops on the street, you get more arrests. And finally, step 5, that new arrest data gets fed right back into the system, which sees it as proof that it was right all along. It's a perfect, vicious cycle.
You know, the system can be biased in even sneakier ways, through something called proxy variables. So the algorithm isn't explicitly told a person's race, but it might know their zip code, or maybe data about poverty levels in their neighborhood. And because of things like historical segregation, these data points can act as really powerful stand-ins, or proxies, for race. It's a way of discriminating without ever mentioning the word.
So that's the theory. Let's talk about what this actually looks like on the ground. How does this theoretical problem create real, tangible impacts on people's lives and their communities?
Let's look at a widely used system that used to be called PredPol. It's a perfect case study. Because it leans so heavily on that historical arrest data, multiple studies found it had a tendency to concentrate police in minority neighborhoods. So what's the result? Well, the system doesn't just predict crime, it actually reinforces the old historical patterns of policing, locking in that self-perpetuating cycle we just talked about.
And we see this pop up in other places too, like in risk assessment tools that are used in court for setting bail or for sentencing. Just look at this chart. Research has found that even for similar crimes, these tools were way more likely to give black defendants a higher risk score than white defendants.
And that score can directly influence a judge's decision, leading to very different outcomes based on a biased prediction.
So if you take one thing away, let it be this, and this quote from our source material just says it perfectly. The algorithm isn't really learning about crime, it's learning to police the data of policing. It's following a map of where arrests have been made in the past, not necessarily a map of where crime is actually happening.
Okay, so if the code is flawed and the data is biased, what do? Is the whole idea just a lost cause? Well, maybe not. Let's look at what a path toward reimagining algorithmic justice might actually look like.
Look, there's no silver bullet here. It's going to take a multi-pronged attack. It means we have to demand transparency so we know how these things work. It means we have to completely rethink the kind of data we feed them in the first place. We need to develop technical fixes to try and reduce the bias, make sure a human is always in the loop, and, this is a big one, we need to address the root causes of crime, not just get better at predicting the symptoms.
And that really brings us to the bottom line. A technical fix is never going to be enough, because you can't just code your way out of centuries of inequality. The goal of making algorithms fair has to be tied inextricably to the bigger, harder goal of creating a more just society for everyone.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. As we keep building these incredibly powerful technologies, we have to ask ourselves a really fundamental question. Is our main goal to get perfect at predicting crime? Or is it to build a better, more equitable society where there's just less crime to predict in the first place?